Good afternoon, everyone. This is George Kriza, CEO of Challenging Decisions, a CEO consultancy. Today, we're joined by Chris Nitzke. Chris, say hello.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Chris, it's a delight to have you with us. Chris is a software design consultant with 25 years experience. He's been specializing in the user experience, what we call in the trade UI UX. And Chris and I had the privilege of working together at MTC Performance in bringing our application from the 3.0 level all the way up to the 4.0 level. That took a 2-year period. That application, if you're not familiar with it, is a very powerful enterprise class incentive management application for channel sales incentives. And we had a really good application at that point, but we wanted to go from good to great. With Chris's help, I feel like we did exactly that. And in fact, after we gave that app a once-over, we won 5 or 6 industry awards for the incredible software that we built. Here's one, which is the Business Intelligence Group New Product of the Year 2017. As I cleverly covered my face with that. And here we have a Stevie Award. We actually got 2 Stevie Awards for the software product as well. So that was really exciting and rewarding as well. So once again, we want to welcome you, Chris, and begin our discussion this way. Software development lifecycle is loaded with challenges. There's no doubt about it. You may have heard that software takes twice as long to build and costs twice as much as the original estimates. From, excuse me, from my experience, that's an understatement, to say the least. The truth is way more painful than that. What do you think contributes to that problem, Chris?
Well, a few things. One of them is that very rarely are the technologists or the developers that are involved in actually building the software, very seldom are they actually subject matter experts. Their focus is on the how of the product and not the why. Now, mind you, they're very smart. The people who develop software, they know what they're doing as far as making it work, but beyond the architecture of the software, they're not really focused on the experience of the software as far as why users click a certain button or why certain fonts work or certain colors work versus others. Their main job is just to make sure that the back end, the database, and all of that works, that you have a functioning application, not so much on the how and the why.
Agreed.
And oftentimes they look down on user front-end users or visual designers who are working on the programs.
Yeah, I was just going to say that is, their IQ is up in the stratosphere there somewhere doing all their heavy lifting engineering. And so that front end to them is just like, it'll be there, it'll work, and they're happy with that. But yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that's the right approach. I think that the front end needs way more attention than it typically gets. And that's why we're having this discussion. So as we entered into this 2-year sprint into the 3 to 4.0 versions of the software, I thought, well, we've got to take an entirely different approach. And I had in my mind that we could do rapid HTML modeling of the next generation application. So we brought Chris into the equation. He joined the team just in time, and his expertise in design and usability combined with my domain expertise in channel incentive software helped us to make really big leaps in the user experience. And we were able to do it really fast. Well, how do you remember that, Chris?
Well, right. When we started out, when you brought me on board, you'd already done some of the, it was your product. So you knew you had a good sense of what you wanted. You already had a good sense of your users and what their pain points were and what their expectations were. So bringing me on board helped with the revamp of the application and take those factors into consideration. A lot of times, some of the things that we dealt with in the project was maintaining consistency across the entire application. As you mentioned, developers and the way they approach things, they're not really focused on little things like that. And those little things make a huge difference. So,
One of the things we had discussed was here we had a really small development team. I think there were 6, 7, 8 developers, a couple of project managers, a couple of testers. And you wouldn't think that you'd end up with silos, but you did. You'd end up with that portion of the product called the knowledge builder.
right,
And the knowledge builder was designed to train people, to quiz people, and reward them for building knowledge around the product line or the sales incentive program. And then you had a thing called promotion builder as another example. Completely different engineers were working on that. There was no interaction between them. And so sure enough, the look and feel and the implementation of everything from the macro elements to the micro elements of the interface were very different.
right.
And we had to then go back and harmonize that.
Well, and part of that, as far as my job as a user experience designer, is to build relationships with all those involved, the stakeholders, the subject matter experts, the product owners, the users, the developers, and figure out what the needs and wants were of all those involved. And having that relationship to kind of counter that silo approach helps end up with a better product, because now you've got everybody on the same page. And this is where the interactive prototypes really played a key role in that, because I was able to build out a design system and build out actual clickable prototypes so that everybody that was involved could sit there and have discussions about what was working, what wasn't working, going through and making sure with the QA people, everything was consistent, and figuring out what the user's pain points were and actually watching them click through the application and come across a situation that was, okay, so what's going on here? And if the user has that experience, that's a bad experience. So we were able to use HTML prototyping as a very quick way to figure those things out without the cost and time investment of actually developing it and then waiting to find out after the fact that something's wrong.
Right. And one other thing I'd like to share with our audience today, we didn't just use what we would call a waterfall method. We had agile development in place in the first place, which means that there's rapid implementations over, let's say, a 2-week period. But rather than just focus on the continuous improvement, I thought it would be effective to design the process into 90-day segments. So each 90-day segment would have a major milestone in terms of rehabbing the entire application. And we probably had 7 such 90-day periods in two years. Now, what you and I did during that period is you and I worked really closely together, me as the, again, subject matter expert, you as the design expert, putting our heads together. And we call it a skunk works, you could call it whatever you want to call it, but we worked very tightly together. And I would say probably you and I spent 30 days of intense work ahead of the actual engineer sprint of 90 days.
Right. And that's typically part of the user experience process, is doing that research to find out, who your users are. And that's where you have the conversations with your subject matter experts, your stakeholders, and your product owners, and also taking into consideration the business demands of what the application is, because sometimes those are 2 different things. And you need to it's helpful to find those out ahead of time before you spend a lot of money into it.
Right. And so ultimately, though, we had those 30-day intense sessions and then handed it off to the developers. And at that point, the developers would come to you and work with you on refining the nuances of what we did, as opposed to pulling me back in as the CEO of the company.
Right.
So,
Which was one of the key advantages to using the HTML prototypes versus some of the other methods that other designers and developers use, is because they were actual functioning clickable prototypes built in HTML. I was able to work out all the usability issues ahead of time, and then hand off to the developers a workable platform that they could just plug in the back end in the database and launch. Do the testing and run it through the QA team, figuring out what still needed to be worked. It was a constant conversation back and forth. So it wasn't, again, it was very much counter to that siloed approach. Everybody was collaborating with everybody, and that ended up with a fantastic product.
and thanks to you and your help, of course, along with the whole team. But one other thing you want to mention is during this handoff to the developers, we want to compare and contrast this to when the only thing that they get is a functional spec that might be 60, 70, 80 pages long. So it's like reading an encyclopedia, and you have to interpret the words of everybody that wrote the functional spec. And it's a much more laborious process to sit there with the functional spec than it is to just quickly see what the functional spec is designed to do. Clearly, they need the functional spec because they have to write code that matches up to the way the calculations work and the database work and so on. But it's way easier than trying to figure out the entire mindset of what the application is supposed to be doing.
And much more precise. If you think about it, a very simple example is if you read the word blue versus if you see blue actually utilized on any type of medium, you get the actual sense of what blue is and what shade of blue you're talking about. And it's the very same thing with a tech spec versus this interactive approach, is you can talk about all the specs and the requirements, but unless you actually have it in front of you and can click through it, it's an entirely different thing, and it's a much better approach.
Yeah. Another thing I'd like to share, back to that 90-day period, one of the magic points of successful execution and not allowing the software project to drag on ad nauseum and add many dollars is these 90-day sprints. What we did, we tied a bonus to the software team for that 90-day period. And it was a meaningful bonus to all of them. And what they had to do was finish on time. We had to have a full working implementation of that 90-day sprint at the end of the 90 days. And I was delighted to pay the bonus, which I did probably 6 out of the 7 times. Now, interestingly, one of the 7 times, I think it was the second one or the third one of that 90-day period, they didn't finish. They took an extra 2 weeks. And they said, well, we still want our bonus. And I said, sorry, the bonus was to get the project done on time and with quality. And so the message got through, and every one of those 90-day sprints from that point on, they finished on time.
Well, but look what those 90-day sprints did. I mean, because we're keeping in mind, we did a complete revamp or overhaul of the application. So it's taking a big project and turning it into manageable chunks. That's kind of the whole purpose of the agile process, right?
Yeah.
And then also to make the developers and the designers and the team accountable to the requirements and what are spec'd out on the schedule. So it helps reduce scope creep. It helps keep the budget down, and it helps maintain a schedule. And ultimately, you want to be able to launch the product at a given time. And how many projects have you been on where you go past schedule and things happen, and then a year and a half later, your product still hasn't launched? I've seen that happen.
Well, somewhere in this equation, I forgot to mention at the front end that this project that we're describing as a case study here, we were $5 million into it and probably 6 years into the project when you joined. And so I wasn't about to have that repeat itself. So we were able to do it within that 2-year time period very adroitly because of putting this method in place. So as far as I'm concerned, rapid HTML modeling is the way to go. It's a terrific idea, and you, the CEO, has to ask yourself this question. Am I willing to hold that software team accountable to use this method, even though they may not want to?
Right.
Because this will make a magical difference in your outcomes. So that's our message for today.
Obviously, it's in a demand right now because a lot of companies are realizing this. I know that in the US job market, user experience designers fall within the top 25 job titles in the entire field. So it's in very high demand. And a lot of companies are realizing that it's not just about making it work, it's about making it user friendly. Apple has designed their entire mobile platform around human-centered design, right? So it's not about just having it work, it's about interacting with the user and make sure that they have a pleasant experience. Because
Don't get me started, Chris. Don't get me started. That's going to be a whole separate video that we'll have to do on the value of the user experience.
Right.
But for now, we're going to wrap up our discussion. And Chris, if someone would like to talk to you about how they could improve the user experience of their application, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, please feel free to check out my portfolio website at chrisnitzke.com. That's CHRISNITZKE.com. Or you can contact me directly at info@chrisnitzke.com.
And you can reach me, George Kriza, Kriza, at 312-320-7760, or Diamond1, the number 1, at challengingdecisions.com. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.